morning. How's that? Perfect. You may be wondering what that is, but you'll find out a little bit. There we go. Thank you to Stu and the whole Safe Schools team, Dave and Renee, and his lovely wife, who have brought me here. I feel like I'm kind of back. I'm a Catholic, and this is very familiar. Nobody in the front seats here. But I have this thing so I can roll and I can go like that. And I sort of know the audience because I was a teacher, I was a principal, but I understand there's also people from police services here as well. And that I wasn't, but it must be the high forehead or something. People would walk in and say, "Are you a cop?" I'd say, "No, I'm the vice principal." Well, some vice principals know sometimes that's not a lot different, or you don't feel that way, but I got to spend a lot of time with police services, and I'm hoping that some of the things I'll say can have some value to you. I was a principal up until 2007, and then I left my principal job. I was really frustrated, went through a bit of a midlife crisis, I guess, and I went back to the University of Toronto to study what happens in the brain when you're motivated, because I had so many kids coming through my office that I knew we could help, but I didn't feel I could, and I didn't feel I could empower my teachers. I wasn't in a place where I felt I could understand enough to do that, and so I left and did the research. And I guess the biggest thing that I can let you know, for me, of what I've learned is it caused me to look at things through a different lens, and I'm going to ask you to indulge me a little bit just to share that with you. So even though it is early, I am going to ask you to stand up if you would. So I'm going to ask you, if you could, to point your feet towards the screen here. And I'm going to show you something you're watching, you'll be able to do in a minute. So I'm going to have you put your hand out. Now, if you just put your hand out, you might be a kinesthetic learner because I said not to. I said watch. Oh, this is really interesting. Oh, you're going to like this today, I can tell, because it's just like that guy in the class, you know? I mean, if you're the grade 3 teacher and you start to talk about paints and he's already over there. And you said, wait, I said, don't go to the paints until I finished explaining. They don't hear that at all. At all. So, something to keep in mind, and I'm going to talk about that. But for now, that was really good, but don't put your hand out now. Just watch me. You're going to have your hand out, your feet are going to be set, and you're going to rotate around this beautiful room, and you're going to go as far as you can until you can go no further. So, now I'm going to ask you to do that, if you would. Put your hand out and slowly rotate until you can go no further. When you've reached the point where you can go no further, look hard at the wall or whatever is there, and get it in your mind's eye so that you can bring it up later. Then turn back. Now, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes for a moment. We're going to visualize. This is as close to Tony Robbins as I get, and it's only 15 seconds, okay? But we know that good learners visualize well. So let's close our eyes and visualize. I want you to visualize your hand in front of you. Kinesthetic learners, do not put your hand out. It's in your mind. I want you to visualize that hand that's out in front of you, and I want you to visualize it rotating around as it did. And now bring into your mind's eye that place that I asked you to look at, the place you stopped, the place you could go no further. Okay, open your eyes, put your hand out, and do what you just visualized. In other words, go to the point you stopped and go a meter further. And then turn back. How many people went further? Just show of hands. It's usually, it's usually 75%. This one is almost 90%. Why couldn't you go further? You just went as far as you could. Is it possible that we have at least a 75% higher chance of achieving something that we set our minds to just by visualizing it? If that's true, let's visualize this. Let's visualize those boys that we work with, either as teachers, or as principals, or as community workers, or in police services. And let's visualize those boys actively engaged and passionate about learning and able to demonstrate what they learn and accomplish the things they need to in school. That's the visualization that I'd like to leave with you for the next half hour that I'm going to talk to you. Grab a seat, please. Why do we have to focus on the boys? What's the problem with the boys? Well, we know that there are twice as likely as girls to be diagnosed with ADHD, but I found this interesting. We know that in every school, they make up the majority of all of these. As a matter of fact, it doesn't matter what postal code you're in, because in every school in North America, boys make up the lowest quarter of performers in school, no matter how wealthy or poor the school is. So it's not poverty has something to do with it, but it's not simply a poverty thing. As a matter of fact, I live in Oshawa, and they're having a real challenge there with boys staying in school after they've entered into colleges. Do you know in the United States, many universities and colleges are crossing what they call the 70% red line. The 70% red line is, once you get more than 70% of girls in your population enrollment drops off tremendously. So much that it could endanger even some of these colleges. People stop registering for your school. It turns out when they looked into the data, the fact of the matter was that women didn't want to go to schools where there weren't men. So when there was more than 70%, it was something that caused them pause, and they decided that they wouldn't attend. Now the question is, not that why should those women be there? They should be there because they accomplished and got there. But why aren't the men there? And why aren't they staying when they enter? And it's something that's increasing in the past 10 years. We know that in schools we're trying to teach kids through all of our various ways of testing these skills. These are skills that are generally recognized as what's going to be needed in the rest of this century and into the future for learners. These are the ones I find boys have trouble with. And the challenge is, if they do not get those skills, they're going into a different world. I'm sure some of you have read the book by Sheryl Sandberg. That's basically a shout out to women across North America, basically saying, you go girl, it's your time. And indeed it is. The glass ceiling does exist, but across North America in middle management, women are more and more in those middle management roles. Those of you in education have seen that take place over the past 20 years. And I don't think it's because we decided, well, it's time to be nice and be good to the women. I think it's because of the skills that women have. Intuitive sense of social emotional intelligence, the willingness to collaborate, the willingness to work well in a team and listen to others, the willingness to work at a moderately hard effort over a long period of time instead of work really, really hard and have to have a long rest. Those are skills that women naturally come to. And what happens in our socially connected world, those skills are privileged now. And that is why their skills are more and more needed in the workplace. The other thing, though, is, remember in the 1990s, we had this emphasis, if you're a teacher or a principal, you know this, we had this emphasis on helping girls in math and science. Can anybody tell me who that girl is? Her name's Ann Makasinski, but do you know what she accomplished? Yes? She invented the hollow flashlight that's run by the heat of your hand, no batteries in it. She won. She's a BC girl, 16 years old, I think. She won Google's North American Science Fair with that. And if you go on websites where you see science fair websites and whatnot, you see young women doing the most amazing things in science now. My son was in engineering, graduated there. More and more women even moving up there, particularly in certain places where they hadn't moved before in engineering. And so, to me, that's a great example of what happens when you decide, you know, we need to differentiate a bit in how we do teaching and learning. And this is the result. The flip side of that, though, is we know that I think it's 94.7%, and someone can correct me, of prison inmates in North America are male. The vast majority of people who have been involved in violent revolution around the world are male as well. And in many cases, not that there wasn't a reason why those things happened beyond the fact that males participated, but in many cases, those males could not find a foothold in the society. For example, in Egypt, you had people who were actually fairly well educated, but they couldn't get into the society because of the way the economy was, because of all the corruption, and they couldn't start a family until they had a job. And so you had many of them who were out in the streets doing these things. Now, you may think, you know, if you're a teacher, whatnot, I don't teach criminals or revolutionaries, etc., based on most days. But this is the bigger challenge in North America, I find. That's the 33-year-old who lives in the basement, plays video games, and sponges off the women in his life. His wife, his mom, his girlfriend, etc. There's a whole series of buddy movies, etc., which celebrate this failure to launch. And we have a significant number of males coming to a point where they've not actually participated in the economy and they're getting into their 30s. We don't really know what's going to happen with that. But by and large, if males don't find a way to participate in society, my belief is they go to fight or flight. And I'll explain why in a little bit. I mentioned I left my role because I was really frustrated. And I had these kids, and if you're an administrator, you know this. You know, and they're 90% boys. They're sitting across from you, you know. They're in your offices, they're not doing their work, they've done something antisocial, they haven't known what they're supposed to in school, they've cut school, skipped out, etc. and so forth. And you look at them, you know, they're pretty bright. They can achieve, and actually they do achieve in other places. So what I tried to do is think of what were the things that motivated males to achieve throughout millennia. And in the research I did, and as I said, we worked with thousands of teachers and kids, and I read a lot of neuroscience, we came to these 6 things. Game, movement, humor, challenge, mastery, and meaning. And those are things that if you look here, it's a little more hierarchical. These are the easiest things. If you're an elementary school teacher or administrator, it is very, very easy to engage young children and young boys in that, even older males. But these are the easiest ways for males to enter. These are more invitational. They have to decide they want to do them. And the only reason they will is if that is there. So let's do a quick detour to neuroscience. I'm not a neuroscientist, but I had to read a lot of it as part of my research. There's 3 things you need to understand about how the brain works. And many of you may know this already. We know this through magnetic resonant imaging and a whole bunch of other things. All that colored stuff is brain activity. Even when somebody's sitting there looking like nothing's going on, that's what's happening in their brains in many cases. The brain physically changes in response to experience. In other words, your brains will be different when you walk out here for the break than when you came in. And not just different in the thing that, well, you may say you have a different thought, but it would be physically different. If we had an MRI there where the exit sign was, and you stopped when you came in and when you went out, you would see, or not you, but a neuroscientist would see physical changes, neuroelectrical connections that are made, chemical connections that are made when learning happens. And so when learning happens is when the brain cells connect. They connect over synapses. And the strength of a neural pathway, that's all the connection in the brain cell, is what learning is. In other words, really, teaching and parenting, really for learning, is about strong neural pathways. And you know what a strong neural pathway is? You're out here today, and if I remember, certainly when I was an administrator and I knew I was going away tomorrow, it seemed the day before was really bad, and the day after was sometimes challenging as well, right? And I came back, and so think of maybe you had one of those days in the past week and you got into your car to drive home. And you started the car and all of a sudden you were in your driveway. You had no idea how you got there. You were just there. That's a strong neural pathway. You drove a multi-ton vehicle around without that awareness. And I think, oh, if we could do that with fractions, right? If we could make neural pathways so easy, and yet you know boys, I mean, all people, but boys in particular have those neural pathways. If you have a son that plays video games, have you ever asked him to explain what he's doing while he's doing it? He'll actually tell you all these things that you actually get to the point and say, okay, thanks. It's enough information. He has those neural pathways really strong. Some of you know males who are involved in sports. Same way, they don't think about it when they're moving towards the goal. It's an unconscious competence. This was the thing that was probably the most frustrating that I learned, though, is that if we want to create neural pathways, students must be engaged. And if you're a teacher and you're not engaging your students, and the research is so clear on this, you're wasting your time. As a matter of fact, even if your students know it and they're not engaged, they may not show you. Here in Ontario, well, we had this push right as I was ending, and I don't think they made it yet. It was 75 and 75. They want 75% of the kids in the provincial test at level 3, getting 75 or more. And what they kept finding was this big drop-off in grade 6, particularly among males. Well, this explains some of it. This is Brazilian street vendors. These are kids who live on the street by their wits, and they survive by getting garbage, refashioning it, selling it to these people who stop for 2 minutes at stoplights and whatnot. They tested their computation skills. In other words, how quickly they could add, subtract, etc. Well, because they were alive, they were almost perfect. Because they had to be able to make those quick computations. They took them into a classroom and tested them again, and their ability to do it dropped by 50%.
If you're a teacher, how many times have you looked at that boy and said, I know he can do this? He's not. He's not going to show you. I know if they could get that 75 and 75, they just convinced grade 6 boys the test was worth taking. That they should put more effort into it. So the challenge with engagement is not only in creating the neural pathways, it's demonstrating what you already know. And the problem is now there are so many other places where people could be engaged than in the past. Now I'm talking about male brains. We use boys and girls, but I'm talking about male brains. Brain research from Michael Gurian indicates that there's a continuum. And 20% of girls have what you might call a male mind. It's got nothing to do with kind of sexuality, gender per se, it's the way their mind works. And if I'm describing some things today and you say, that sounds like my daughter, or that sounds like me, and you're a female, that may very well be true. On the other side, around 15% of boys tend to approach learning with more of a female mind, or that some of the characteristics that are in a female mind. So this is not to pigeonhole anyone, but anyone who's worked with kids for any period of time knows that there are tendencies. So let's look at these 6 secrets. Movement. We know that movement is unbelievably powerful from the earliest time, particularly for males. If you're a grade 2 teacher, the easiest way to throw your class off is to have a truck drive outside the window. And this is something that's interesting. This is an 11-year-old boy and girl at rest. The white puffy stuff is brain activity. They're not asleep, they're just sitting. This here is keeping your heart beating and your digestive system going. I'm told that's the remote control center right there. This is the female. She is probably having a full conversation with herself with punctuation. She is going across the corpus callosum using both sides of her brain to process oral language. Males tend to only use one side of their brain early on to process oral language, more on the left side. The right side has tons of wiring for movement and perception of movement. And so what happens is boys tend to enter school, on average in North America, 18 months behind girls in oral language. If you're a kindergarten teacher, think about that old Charlie Brown cartoon with the teacher. Blah, 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 blah. That's how it feels. So imagine that boy comes in and he's got tremendous movement. He feels really good. He can't sit still. But how come he can sit still when he's playing video games? Because what are video games saturated with? And what do you get to see more of as you get better at them? Right? So much that even for an adult, it's like, whoa. And so when you think about these things, it's important to know that it's not a choice. One of the things I like to tell both teachers and parents is physiology is not character. They tested 2-week-old babies in a crib. They put them there, male and female, one after the other. On one side of the crib was a mobile that rotated around. The other side, the mother of the child looked over just the face. 80% of the time, females looked right at the face. 80% of the time, males looked the other way. Now think about that. Everything in that little boy's life for those 2 weeks has come from that face. And what is he looking at? The big shiny object, right? The thing that's spinning around. He's not choosing to do that. He's got those perceptions. The challenge is then he goes into the classroom, in particular when he's young, and he has to sit still. And he hasn't got the oral language. How many times have the little boys been told, use your words, not your hands? And if they didn't learn that quick enough, they came to see me. The coolest thing that I learned was that brain research now shows connections between the cerebellum and where most of our movement is seated. They see it light up during memory tasks. So you can use movement to help gain retention. And we have strategies that use that. This is one called Still Life, which that boy right there is actually the second part of the water cycle. He's describing precipitation, but he's frozen. So for a teacher, it's really nice. He's using his body, but he's not moving, right? He's got to be totally frozen. But he's talking, and when he's talking, he's making a dual neural connection. The connection with his body, understanding precipitation, but also his words. And he's actually moving from the right side to the left side of the brain when he's talking. These are kids doing beginning, middle, and end of the story, and this is a high school grade 9 class doing an algebraic equation. So they're using their bodies, the movement, the natural movement strength they have to help them. Let's go to the next one, game. Now, I was with, I don't know, about 500 teachers the other day, most of them female. Is there a female in the room who can tell me who these guys are? Yes? Good job. Pardon the interruption. How many guys knew who those guys were? That is a really cool thing. This is one of the most popular sports shows in North America. But one of the things I want to point out is it talks about games. And you might say, fine, you know, they're talking about games. But it's directed at males. So you can't just talk about it. It has to be a game. You may not be able to see it, but up there's a little timer. For each topic they talk about, they only get so many seconds to talk. And a bell rings, and they have to change topics. And then afterwards, a referee comes out and says who was right and who was wrong when they were talking about the topics. And they go boom, boom, boom. They do a whole bunch of topics. And at the end, they do what's it called? The rundown or something, which is even faster. Now, you might think, okay, that's a male. That's a show male site. But think about how anomalous that is. Would you ever see something like that in a show that was directed primarily to a female audience? No. Imagine an episode or a day on Oprah where they said, well, why did you have to leave him? You have a minute and 20 seconds. Go. That would be insulting, right? But for males, it's very powerful. Here's another thing that's different. I had two boys, and the people next door had two girls. They both liked games. They both liked to play video games, but I bet they never saw this. I would walk past, and there my guys playing their games. I'm fine. I go to the kitchen. I come back, and they're rolling on the floor, pounding each other. Angry, angry, angry. I lift both of them up. And I was like, what's going on here? You go do this, you go do that. You're not playing games anymore. I couldn't figure it out. Why was that? Well, this was that. We know that testosterone makes males who they are in the womb, and we know what happens when they're teenagers. But here's something I didn't know in 27 years. Oh gosh, I wish when I was a teacher and a principal I knew this. About age 5 to 7, boys start to get jolts of testosterone when they set a goal and achieve it. And those of us who are males, I mean, testosterone makes you feel pretty good. As a matter of fact, it's so powerful that it influences behavior. It's one of the reasons why we love sports. They did tests in Europe with soccer teams, not soccer teams, soccer fans, after a match, and they tested the testosterone in the fans of the winning side and the losing side. And the fans of the winning side had 50% more testosterone in their saliva. One of the things about this, though, is that when males set a goal and don't achieve it, they lose testosterone. There's a drop. It's not massive, but you don't feel it. It just doesn't feel as good. So you often want to get that. Well, think about again that little boy who comes into the classroom. Maybe he starts to be 6 or 7. When I was a principal, I noticed I started to get a lot of boys in my office around grade 3 to 4. And they were silly things. For example, the sainted yard supervisor would bring in a kid and say, do you know what he just did? They were playing a nice soccer game, and he picked up the ball and ran to the end and dove into the goal. Now, the kid played on the soccer team. I knew he knew how to play soccer. But you know what I think now? I was like, oh, attention getting again, right? You're always trying to do to get attention. Here's what I think happened now. Because he always struggled in school, and a whole bunch like it. If you are in a classroom for 90 minutes and the subtext says you're stupid, nobody says it, right? But you've had it a long time. What you do just doesn't succeed. You need a win. And some of this hyper-aggressive behavior that I was seeing for boys, I look at now and think, you know what? He's trying to get a win. He needs a win. If I had known that as a teacher, or I knew that as a parent, I would make sure if my son didn't like school, he could get wins around learning. So he could feel he's a learner. Because you get to a certain point, and boys just stop trying. And I think about grade 3 or 4, I either saw them in the office all the time, or it was the flight thing. You know, the boy that sits in the back of the class, and he's often happy-go-lucky and things like that, and you look at his notebook, and there's nothing there. And so, one of the challenges is to figure out how you can get wins for kids. So we're going to do a little thing here, and if you're a teacher, you can take this back and do this next week. Let's see here. I'm going to, can I have you help me for a second here? Yeah, Colleen, she doesn't even know this. We're going to do something called back and forth. This is, you know, the Little Red Riding Hood story. We're going to tell it one word at a time. So I'm going to say it once, and you can say it
time,
there,
was,
a
little,
girl
who,
went
for a walk, oh, for, walk,
to
the
grandmother's.
house.
Ah, good. I want you to turn to a partner in your group, or if you're really smart, you can do 3 people. Try and get 1 or 2 sentences, not exactly what we did, but try and tell that story back and forth. I challenge you to see if you can do that. Go ahead, go, right now. And stop. I have done that with 40-year-olds and 75-year-old nuns in Milwaukee. And the same thing always happens. A, people start laughing, and B, they don't stop talking, right? They love this kind of thing. Why? It's just a silly game. Well, it's often like, why did they say something so crazy, right? And so, here's the power of that. That was a game. Girls really like that because there's a connectivity involved. But boys like it because they can get a jolt of testosterone. And here's an example. That you can do with curriculum. These boys had to do a back and forth story about beginning, a middle, end of the story. This boy here didn't write. He was in a fairly tony area of Toronto, and it was mid-October, and he hadn't written anything. He had an aide that came around with him. He had some, he had problems writing, etc. We played this game. Those 2 guys grabbed each other physically, right? Back and forth saying it. And when they were done, I said, okay, you got 60 seconds. You got to go back to your desk. We'll see who gets the sentences down first. They ran back to their desk. And the one guy who never writes is like this. Hey, what's going on here? But I'll tell you what, this was taken right after. That's testosterone. You see that? He's accomplished something. This is the difference with boys. They have to have the accomplishment or the words don't mean anything to him. But his face, is it the best paragraph? No. But it's the only thing he's written in 3 weeks. And he did it in like 3 minutes. The next week, the principal let me know that the parents called the school and said, what are you doing here? He wants to write stories at home. It turned out, and some of you have kids like this, I had a son like this, he was a perfectionist. He didn't like it when his letters were not right. So he didn't write. And this thing got him right over the hump. A little game that showed him he could have a win. We have this spark cycle and some of the stuff we do, we can almost guarantee kids can memorize anything because they're totally engaged. That's the power of total engagement. Let's move quickly into the next one, humor. We know that males have a different kind of sense of humor. And the Roman word, and you know, when I looked at this, I was wondering, I knew male was it was powerful for males, but I wondered why, and I wasn't sure about including it, but when I did the research, I found, wow. There's great evolutionary research that indicates that humor developed on the savannah to keep males alive when they were hunting. Because humor is based on dissonance. And when you're hunting on the savannah, if there's a leaf that starts to move, that could be your dinner, that could help your family survive, or it could kill you. And if you don't pay close attention to dissonance, you don't survive. Well, what's humor but dissonance? Think of the little things little boys like, the thing that you're not, fart jokes, right? All of these things that are not supposed to happen but are really dissonant. Males love that. And the thing about that, too, is that it helps to focus attention. So you can use humor. In the classroom, they did surveys of kids who graduated, particularly kids who struggled in school, and often the teacher that they really remembered was the one that had a sense of humor. It didn't matter if they were really tough. It just mattered that they had that sense of humor, and that meant something to them. That's because males use humor to bond with each other. Think of those 2 11-year-old kids. If it was the girl and she was with her girlfriend, it's not uncommon that she might say, it's good to be with you today. It's good we can spend time together. The 11-year-old boy, not so much. What's he going to do? He's going to make a joke. He's going to say something crass. Women are amazed sometimes at what men will say to each other and not get insulted. Because the humor, when you say you so-and-so or pull a crank on someone or do something like that, you're saying it's good to be with you in this moment. And that's very powerful for males. And the other thing that's very powerful is that males use humor to confront the chaos of the universe. There's this thing called gallows humor. Not a lot of women use it, but a fair number of men do. The example I like to use was Ronald Reagan, when he was shot and wheeled into the operating room and he was about to die. He looked up at the doctors before he fainted and said, I hope you're all Republicans. Well, that's not a female thing to say. And if you're a teacher, have you ever not being a public, I mean, I just think it's not, sorry, thinking it's not something to make a joke about, something that's, I had a parent come up to me, I was presenting them in to parents, and she said, you know what, when we went into the SATs, there was a whole bunch of guys making all these jerky jokes and things like that outside, and I was really nervous. She said, do you think they were nervous too? I said, yeah, I think they probably were. And have you ever been a teacher? I remember teaching in grade 7, and I had this tough, math was always hard for me, and I had this tough concept, we were almost there, and then he started. He started this nonsense in the back of the room, right? Over and over, all the time, and I was like, yeah, typical grade 7, oh yeah, you want to go? Okay, come on. You know, if you want attention, you want to take attention from me, that was sort of the attitude, and yet now I think, no. He was scared. And it was easier for him to get kicked out of class than for me to ask him a question about the math. And so you think of that. Look at a boy who's kind of happy-go-lucky, etc., or always uses humor to deflect things, and see how they might use it, because it's a tool. This is one of the ways we use it in the class, slow motion. I don't know why, but slow motion is hilarious with boys. They love it. Girls are so bad. But boys just love slow motion. These two guys, this is a teacher who has 4 sons, and she's very busy. And they had to do something on the solar system. So this guy's the sun, this one is rotating around the sun in slow motion. And they had to freeze and answer a question and run and write it. And then they got to switch. Silly, 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 but they got the homework done in half the time. And if you're an educator, if you're a parent, you know this, if you're an educator, you need to be aware in North America, the #1 complaint about school after bullying is homework. Homework turns families upside down. So, these are the 3. The easiest to connect with boys. Well, let's talk about mastery and challenge. Okay, challenge, we know that challenge is important. What did Edmund Hillary say when they said, why do you want to climb Mount Everest? Because it's there. Which is kind of a dumb thing when you think about it, right? But that's a very male thing. We know that males get blessed with testosterone when they seek challenges. And they'll also be able to demonstrate mastery. These guys are with a big puffy thing, Pikachu, right? The average 16-year-old wants to stand with something like that, wouldn't, but these guys beat 500 other kids. And so it's an example of their mastery. This was an experiment at the University of Pennsylvania. They took males and females into rooms separately, gave them a ring toss, gave them one instruction. Get the rings on the stake. That was it. Most of the women in the study picked up the rings, went, want me to do anything else? Not one male did that. What did the males do? Threw it behind the back, under the leg. One guy opened up the door so he could step outside, which was illegal in the study, right? Do it. Why? Why did they have to make it some kind of big challenge? I call that, when I'm driving with my wife, the I don't need to look, I know where I'm going kind of thing, right? Because you know what? I do. 93 to 95%, I know exactly where I'm going. But that other 5% is sweet, right? And that's the challenge that males often set for themselves. And if you're a guy, you know that. You often set challenges for yourself to be. And it's one of the things that's very powerful. And if you know it, you can use it. This is the easiest thing. Almost any kid, any boy, beat the clock. You tell them they have to do something. You set a timer. It works better. There's really good research showing that males perform moderately better on a timed task. Whereas females don't actually. Even on tasks that are as long as like the SATs or whatnot, if there's a timing there, they don't tend to feel as confident they can do it, even though they can perform just as well. Okay, mastery. We know from anecdote and research that boys are less likely to ask for help than girls when they're having trouble in school. And we know that males have ego problems sometimes and control problems. That guy there, you're not the boss of me. I met him in various versions. I'm sure some of you administrators have as well. And I sort of had to say, yeah, she kind of is the boss of you. That's why you're here. But on the flip side, that's a good sentiment, because we want boys that have control of themselves, that have mastery over themselves, that can be about the things they want to do. The sentiment's right. It's just we have to help them to apply it differently. And I think this comes from the fact that for millennia, males being able to master certain skills, like you couldn't hunt unless you could throw the spear. And you didn't get the spear until you proved you could do it. Remember the old Kung Fu? Snatch the pebble from my hand, right? You are not able to do something until you obtain mastery. And boys love mastery. You will know that I knew this. I had kids come in my office, and all I had to do was the half page of math. Oh, I can't do it, etc. And yet that kid knew every statistic of every player on the Maple Leafs. And males do that all the time. I mentioned that males tend not to read as well because of some of their neurowiring, except on Wikipedia, where males make 85% of the entries. Why is that? Because it's got to do with mastery. It's proving that you know and you can change and you can improve things. And some of you in your own life, some of you females have already had males are always trying to solve things when they don't necessarily need to be solved, right? It's a proof of mastery and it's very powerful. Well, we can do that, help boys do that, by creating a structure, very simple in schools, that can help them attain mastery. Because when they attain mastery, they put themselves into what they do. Okay, we get to the final one, meaning. Now, boys ask this question in mastery of, what is it good for? I think they ask of themselves a more profound question. What am I good for? What am I good for in this world? And if males do not answer that question in a good fashion, it doesn't go well for them. And it tends to go really, really badly for the people around them. Some of the worst things that males have done in the world have been done in a quest for significance, to prove that they were someone. We just had 7 years of a television series called Breaking Bad, which was all about one thing. One guy's quest for significance, to prove that he was significant. And the thing, if you don't know it now, you need to be aware that every male has a hero complex. From the little boy to the old man. Every male wants to be heroic, craves making a difference in their world. And so the work they do has to be meaningful. I would say it was probably 80-20 when I was a high school teacher. The kids, males and females, would say, "Sir, what do we have to learn this for? What's the purpose of this?" Gladwell talks about meaningful work. And when I looked at these things, which we absolutely have to build into our school system, and I looked at my own teaching, I realized they were sort of lacking. So how do we get males to get meaning? Well, we bring them to service. In other words, the learning they do, you can't tell a 6th grader that you're going to need this in college. But if his learning has meaning in the context of service, it can be useful. So the little boy, he does not want to learn his numbers, but Grandpa doesn't know his numbers. So he's going to teach Grandpa. He's going to show Grandpa. Do you know that there are 7-year-old boys who make videos about Star Wars and how to get to the different levels in the Star Wars game, and other 7-year-olds throughout North America watch them? There are hundreds of these instructional videos made by little boys. Why couldn't we do that with fractions? If he knows it, if you're a parent or a teacher, why couldn't you let a little boy make the video and show it to someone else? And in other words, that knowledge that you have is not just for you, it's for the service of somebody else. And of course, we know, and any of you, I worked in a really tough school in South Oshawa. The best times we had with those kids is when we let them be mentors. When we took them into some of the other schools and they could be mentors to other kids. It's tremendously powerful. And then their learning had meaning because they were sharing it with others. So, we come to the end of the 6 secrets, and we see what role each one plays in helping boys develop. So I'll tell you the story of Chad, and then I'm done. I told you I left in 2007. I was a principal on base board. And interesting clientele. But I left, and I didn't have a plan other than I had been accepted for doctoral research, but I wasn't really being paid anything. So I walked away from my job. And it was really hard. It was hard for my family. It was a really tough time. And I was the last day of school. I'm a K-8 school. I'm the principal. I'm in the office. And there's all these boxes there because I got to get out because the new principal's coming in. And in comes Chad. The grade 8 teacher brings him down. Now, Chad was a grade 8 student. I knew Chad. We met every other day for most of the year. He was always there visiting me. And he was a happy-go-lucky kid, great skateboarder, and in Texas, the girls liked him. He memorized 10 pages of lines in one of the plays that I put on. I knew he had tremendous abilities. But here was graduation day, and all they had to do was write a paragraph that was going to go on the wall as they talked about what they wanted to do in high school. And he had nothing, and the teacher was livid, because he'd worked with them all years. He sat down and he says, he's staying here and taking the rest of the kids outside. I looked at Chad, and it's terrible to say, but I just wanted to go. I was like, okay, Chad, and I got into my principal thing. And he says, Mr. Dixon, stop. But he said it with a really strange voice. And his body was kind of really stiff and his eyes were watery. And he said, let's face it, I'm stupid. You know it, I know it, my parents know it. And then he grabbed the paper and he just started to write, tears coming down. He wouldn't look at me, he wouldn't talk to me. And if you've been with kids for a while, you know there's certain times that you should shut up. And I really didn't have anything to say to him. I got my wish, he went back, and I looked out the window. I was like, he's been here 8 years. This how he's gone to high school? When I heard that kid dropped out of high school in a couple of years later, it didn't surprise me. But it also helped to kick me out the door. Because really, what I found out is there are more of those kids than we think. And if we don't find a place for them to learn, we have a hard time in our society. Contrast that with Jeff. He was a kid in high school that I taught, and he was a slacker par excellence. He did very little, just stayed. He was so close to getting kicked out over and over and over again. Between grades 11 and 12, he went and rode in an EMS, emergency medical services vehicle. Somehow, his cousin got him in to ride with him. And when he's riding with him, he's like, oh, this is it, this is cool, this is what I want to do with my life. And his cousin said, you're not going to do this. You got to go to school. You got to do well in school. And I know, Jack, you don't do school. Oh, I could do this. No, I don't think so. What do I got to do? Well, you have to do well in math and science, etc. He came back the next year without telling anyone and got B's to B pluses in all the subjects. I commented on it. You know, I went to him because he had been, again, in one of the things I work with, and I said, oh, that's pretty. He said, I still hate school. But now I know what I want. Now I know what I want. So my belief is that together, parents, teachers, and community members can reach success. What I've tried to do is with myself, I've got a book, and then we built a community. You can get information about that outside, which is to help parents, and we do the same with teachers. We do workshops, professional developments, things that allow schools to get money back for implementing things that help boys. And then we do stuff with community members. So I'm going to show you this 30 seconds. I want you to think of those 6 secrets that I gave you and see if you can pick out each one.
Oh, it's such a perfect day. I'm glad I spent it with you. Oh, such a perfect day. You just keep me hanging on. You just keep me hanging on.
30 seconds and all 6 were there. Movement, game, humor, challenge, mastery, and even meaning. That's subliminal, right at the end. Greatness awaits. Really? Really? Do you know the biggest employer of neuroscientists is not the military or the NSA in North America? It's the gaming companies. Because they know how to engage kids. I believe it's time as educators and parents, we take that back through a better understanding of what helped to engage our boys. Very quickly, 15 seconds. Last story. Grade 3 classroom, the bell is rung. Teacher's at the front, turns back, sees a little boy at the back who never misses recess. And he's there coloring like crazy over paper. You know, the big dark boy coloring? And she walks back and says, what are you doing? He doesn't look up. He says, I'm drawing a picture of God. She laughs. Oh, it's going to be kind of hard. Nobody knows what God looks like. Then he does look up and says, they will in a minute. Whenever I tell that story, I think of my 2 boys who are now 27 and 29. I think what I want for them. Life is hard. You're going to have hard times. But you know what? You have that right to show that greatness that's within you. And to do it for the good of others. And that's the message I want to share with you this morning. And I thank you and the Safe Schools Network for having me. Thank you.